This is not a test. Stay calm in an orderly fashion. Make your way to the lifeboats.
Mayday, the ship is sinking.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to Lifeboat Addiction Recovery Cast. As always, my name is Christian Powell, one of your co-hosts. So today marked part 4 of the recovery and addiction on the brain with our guest lecturer, Reverend Dr. Deborah Smith. If you're interested in listening to more of Reverend Dr. Deborah Smith's podcast, go ahead and look at the previous 3 Mondays. But today is going to be on, I believe, methamphetamines. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to the good doctor herself, and we will get it going here.
And I'm glad to be with you today. And I will be, as Christian said, talking to you today about methamphetamine. As we start this out, I want you to know that methamphetamine is a very common drug. It's actually the second most common drug that we're using right now in the United States. It's powerful and it's highly addictive, and it's actually a stimulant, so it pulls us up instead of brings us down. It has its strongest impact on our central nervous system. However, there are other things that we're going to talk about today that it impacts. There's a lot of different names for it, but the most common is crystal methamphetamine. It's a form of a drug that looks like glass fragments or some shiny bluish white kind of rocks. It's chemically similar to amphetamines. And as we know, amphetamines is a drug that we use to treat attention deficit disorder, ADHD, narcolepsy, which is that sleep disorder where people just keep sitting and falling asleep. So they use an amphetamine appropriately to help wake up the children, wake up the person so that they don't fall asleep. Now, for years, we used amphetamines to help. They used to be called Mother's Little Helpers, where people would, housewives, well, ancient thing, right? Housewives would keep a little vial in the refrigerator called Mother's Little Helpers. And they were an amphetamine-like drug that helped them to, in those waning hours at 3 o'clock before they had to get things ready for dinner, it'd give them a little boost. We also know that way back in the 70s, there were things like Dexatrim and some other products that had an amphetamine. It was not controlled. And that's where a lot of people started to use amphetamine drugs. So there was a history of amphetamines being used for medicinal purposes appropriately. But then it was used, like many drugs that can cause addiction, it was used to create a chemical that was distilled down to a much more potent product, the methamphetamine. Other common names for meth is blue, crystal, ice, meth, and speed. Now, people use it in a variety of ways. Sometimes you might think like, oh, people only smoke meth or they do this, but meth can be smoked. It can be swallowed like a pill. It can be done, crushed up and snorted, get into the mucous membranes. And it can also be injected, and the powder has been dissolved in either water or alcohol. Think of that. Here you have a chemical that is human created, not in a laboratory that's FDA approved, but some kind of shop where it's created. And now you're going to take that chemical that you have no idea what was used in the creation of it, and you're going to crush it down. You're going to put it in alcohol, and you're going to shoot it into your veins. Yeah, and we do. People do that, and it causes, initially, it's the synthetic recreational drug gives a potent euphoria. I mean, that goes in your system, and immediately you feel euphoric. This form of speed can help people be much more highly accomplished. They can actually be able to stay up for days and get more done, but it has some extraordinarily challenging long-term effects. Methamphetamine, as I said, is the second oldest drug, and it can cause imbalances in the brain, the endocrine system, your glandular system. and in other neuroendocrine balance areas of your mind and body. The long-term result, you can have brain damage and neuron damage. So the long-term result can be quite problematic. Now, you've heard different people talk about neurotransmitters. Those are those little boats in our brains that deliver chemicals so that the dopamine neurotransmitter helps us to deal with our emotions and deal with our, deal with our emotions and help us to the pleasure pain pathway. Now, dopamine is a primary neurotransmitter that is impacted by methamphetamine. Dopamine, that neurotransmitter, allows us to feel pleasure and pain, allows us to feel up, euphoric, helps us to control some motor functions, and it is directly involved with our memory and our focus. When methamphetamine binds or adheres or connects to a dopamine transporter or DAT, then what happens is the ability for that dopamine to go into the rest of your body and go on to the next neurotransmitter is blocked. So here I have dopamine that's coming down the neurotransmitter, and then all of a sudden it get released into the synaptic gap, that place that's between the dendrite here that's trying to look for the next section of dopamine. And this is called the synaptic gap. And then I wind up with tons of bioavailability, or that dopamine stays here. And that's what causes the euphoria, because I have a lot more dopamine in that area. With the increased bioavailability of the dopamine in the synaptic gap, I can just feel like, wow, life is great. Now, that's what causes the emotional addiction to the drug. Repeated use of methamphetamine will result in dopamine depletion. So if I know that dopamine is giving me pleasure, making me feel good, controlling my mood, helping me to focus and become more productive, gives me energy, and now I have this super boost of dopamine that is supercharging my body, I'm going to say, my mood is extremely elevated. I'm getting a ton of stuff done. I feel great. Life is wonderful. Let's do it again. And I'm going to keep using it. Well, the problem is the more I release dopamine into my synapse, into that bioavailability section of my mind, my body, the place where dopamine is, what's going to happen is it's going to signal to my body, woohoo, too much dopamine, don't produce the dopamine. And dopamine, when it lingers in there, can actually become toxic to the natural dopamine receptors when we are using at high levels, which results in desensitization. So basically, all my ability to produce naturally dopamine to help me feel good is now going to stop. And all of this dopamine that I'm synthetically putting into my system is not going to have the same effect after repeated uses because it's damaging the reuptake system. So ongoing methamphetamine use will eventually reduce not only the dopamine, but two other extraordinarily important enzymes in our body, which is norepinephrine and epinephrine. These decreases in the dopamine and the desensitization of the receptors also can create, since my mood, think about it, if my mood on regular dopamine is like, I'm going on, now I take all that dopamine away, the likelihood it's not going to make me more passive. The loss of significant dopamine bioavailability is going to make me more agitated. And when I get more agitated, I can become more violent. I can actually have paranoid psychosis. I can really become angry and agitated. Inflated use can also cause permanent brain damage. And I'm not trying to say here that use the scare tactics. This isn't like the reefer madness of the days of old when you're saying like, oh, methamphetamine, bad. And well, it is. It's a synthetic that damages my dopamine receptor system, creates a problem with norepinephrine and epinephrine, which are both important enzymes in my stabilization of my mood. And when I don't have it, because my body's not producing its own level of dopamine, then it's telling me I'm going to take mild-mannered me and become violent and become paranoid. We see it happening. We often call it tweaking. We see that a person who is using methamphetamine regularly, once that starts to go out of their system and they're waiting to redose, we see that agitation. We also know that it causes damage to the nerve endings. We see people who start scratching themselves to the point where they're feeling something on their skin, and they scratch themselves to the point where they create sores all over their body. We also call those meth mites. So methamphetamine generally may feel good at the first part of the use, but it doesn't stay there for long. There's been studies that have found that meth abuse can cause what also hypoglycemia, which that's part of the endocrine system. Your thyroid, you can either be hypoglycemic or hyperglycemic. Now, hypoglycemic is that it could stop working. And when it causes hypoglycemia in the human brain, it limits glucose ability to be able to get down to the cellular level of our brains. Those suffering from methamphetamine addiction have depleted neurotransmitter levels, causing then now movement problems, depression. It's going to reduce their sexual functioning. They can get insomnia. And they even can have symptoms of schizophrenia. So in a nutshell, methamphetamine's impact on the brain is extraordinarily problematic. It increases the amount of natural chemical dopamine, as we said. And when we talk about dopamine, that is the pleasure-pain pathway. As I said earlier, it's involved in our body movement, but it's not just our physical, it's involved in our motivation and the reinforcement of rewarding behaviors. So if I am taking pleasure, say that I'm a methamphetamine user, where I used to maybe take pleasure in a particular art, like I love to work with glass, I love to carve glass. That's what I do. I love to cut glass and make glass, stained glass projects. That's kind of the thing that Dr. Deb finds to be extremely rewarding. Well, if I have a neurotransmitter depletion and now my movement is a problem, I can't seem to hold my hands straight. If I'm starting to be depressed and I don't have any more motivation to do that work, that I'm going to not feel any reward or any hope in the thing that I actually love to do. Now, for me, that's something external to me. I love to work with glass, but think about those people who love their job. Think about those people who are really committed and are, super parents and are motivated to be engaged with their family. Think about a family system where one of the family members is using methamphetamines, and we start to see behavioral things like schizophrenic type behavior, or even an increase in violence, mood altering behaviors. What we thought in the beginning, using this chemical that would be able to make us happy and give us a lot of energy and help us to cut a few pounds and to help us, really do some cool things in our life, which methamphetamines promises to do, soon reverts to some pretty tragic outcomes. One of the other things that we see with methamphetamine use is a depletion in our ability to hold on to our teeth. And with meth, our teeth begin to rot from the inside at the root level, and then can just all of a sudden fall out. It turns our teeth black, they get decayed, and it's just very, very problematic, where you used to have a nice smile and you used to be able to face the world, and now you don't have teeth anymore. Its ability to rapidly release high levels of dopamine in reward areas of the brain unfortunately, is what gives that reinforcement for the drug taking behavior, making it a wanted experience. We want to use meth. We want to feel better. People who have used methamphetamine and you speak to them, they didn't start out saying, I'm going to ruin my life, I'm going to lose my teeth, and I'm going to become violent towards my family and friends. And I'm going to lose all motivation to do everything I loved. They didn't start taking methamphetamine with that result in mind. People take methamphetamine to start because they need more energy, or other people are using it and they saw how much weight they lost by using it. They see it as a benefit. But repeated use, the short-term effects of repeated uses in small amounts can result in some health effects also, not just your teeth, but it's similar to the health impact that negative health impact that is we find with cocaine and amphetamines. Increased wakefulness and physical activity, where we are actually harming ourselves because we are staying up and we're not sleeping. We have decreased appetite so that we lose weight. Our breathing increases. Can lead to rapid or irregular heartbeat. Think about the person that's using that may have a history of coronary heart disease within their family. It can increase our blood pressure. It increases our body temperature. Now, this is for short-term use. Now, you might say the wakefulness and the physical activity, the decreased appetite, well, that's not a bad thing, but the other ones aren't so good to have. The long-term effects, those people that inject methamphetamine are at increased risk for contracting infectious diseases because of the site, HIV, Hep C, Hep B. They're transmitted through contact with blood or body fluids that can remain on the drug equipment. Their rig could have those, if we're not using clean needles all the time. It can also alter judgment and decision-making. So I have a new body because I've lost all this weight. I'm more energetic early on in my youth. I'm more motivated to get out there to do things. And now I'm thinking I'm on top of the world. So what do we naturally see? An increase in high-risk behaviors. High-risk sex, high-risk needle sharing, high-risk behaviors, also like unprotected sex, so that you make yourself more available to disease and infection. Methamphetamine use may worsen the progression of HIV and AIDS. So a person who already has an immune suppression problem and then uses and contracts the virus. We don't know yet what COVID's going to do with methamphetamine use. There are some early studies, but we don't really know. But dealing with HIV, studies indicate that HIV causes more injury to nerve cells and more cognitive problems in people who use methamphetamines than the general population of those with HIV who do not use methamphetamine. So cognitive problems, thinking process, remember, we thought early use is going to help us to focus. Well, now we're not able to. Now, if we think about it, when we use the drug, cognitive problems that it creates are things like thinking, impacts our thinking, our understanding, how we understand, because thinking is not always about whether we can think something, but do we understand it? Learning and memory. Long-term methamphetamine use has consequences including extreme weight loss, not just, it won't stop where we want it to stop, it'll stop with us being emaciated. Continued use causes addiction, the severe dental problems, intense itching leading to skin sores, as I said. But those things aside, those causes can cause permanent brain structure changes. It can cause confusion, memory loss, sleeping problems. extreme and unreasonable distrust of others. We call that paranoid thinking. You can even have hallucinations. So, does this sound like a good drug for us? So if I want to lose weight, does this sound like the best options for me? I don't think so. The other thing that's not really, people think like, well, meth, you can't overdose. Well, yes, you can. An overdose occurs when the person uses too much of the drug and it has a toxic reaction. Now, this toxic reaction for meth can result in serious and harmful symptoms or death. Now, with opiates, the physical property is that it can cause respiratory failure. The person's heart will stop, they'll stop breathing. It just causes them to shut down. Now, since meth is a stimulant, and we know that it increases our temperature, increases our heart rate, increases our blood pressure, that causes a lot of impact on our heart and our cardiovascular system. So unlike the falling asleep and not waking up that we see with the opioid class of drugs, with meth, we can stroke out, have a heart attack. We can have just an inability to control our temperature and control our heart rate. They can be quite dangerous. Person can die. So when we look at dealing with persons with methamphetamine addiction, we know that a person who suffers from methamphetamine addiction does not need a detox program like somebody with opioids or with alcohol. There's not really a detoxification protocol. We do know that it is difficult to stop the drug because it has such a powerful impact on our neurotransmitter system. We are seeing some new treatments. One is for very short-term hospitalizations, but to be engaged in inpatient treatment where the person can be observed and start reworking some of the problems with the neurotransmitter system. So short-term, increased wakefulness, physical activity, decreased appetite, increased breathing rate, heart rate, blood pressure, temperature, and increased irregular heartbeat. Long-term, anxiety, confusion, insomnia, mood problems, violent behavior, paranoid feelings, hallucinations, delusions, weight loss, severe dental problems, and intense itching leading to skin irritation and sores. Pregnancy, premature delivery, separation of the placenta from the uterus, low birth weight, lethargy, heart, brain problems for both the mother and the fetus. High risk for infection with HIV and hepatitis. In combination with alcohol, it masks the depressive effect of the alcohol, increasing risk of alcohol overdose. And it can have long-term effects on depression, anxiety, and tiredness. So all in all, we're not looking at a really positive drug to be engaged with. I would point you towards, as we close today, that I'm going to see if I can put up on here some research options that are available to you to look at. I would tell you first that NIAAA, NIDA, National Institutes of Drug Abuse and Addiction is a great resource. Let me pull up some ideas here with methamphetamine with NIDA and share those with you. I would encourage you to look further into some of the drug facts, and this is the one I'm going to provide to you today. Let's see if we can get this to share. I would strongly engage you to look at programs that are research-based, such as the one that you see up here, where this is the National Institutes of Drug Abuse, and they have the fact sheet about NIDA, where most of my research came. As you can read, I did look at some other things, and look at that picture of a meth mouth right there. Some additional information that we did not cover today. And then hear about it's treated. CBT works really well. There's some research reports and trends and statistics that are all available to you from NIDA. Now, I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. And I hope that if you have any questions that you'll reach out to ARC to let us know if you have any further questions about methamphetamine or any other drug that we may introduce to you. Having said that, have a great day and join us next week when we have another installment of podcasts looking at the different drugs that are available.